As the planet heats up, many animal species are either headed north or going extinct. This makes the work of the poet as witness that much more important. Who is here now? And as the culture becomes more and more reductionistic, a product of a human centric delusion, there are poets and naturalists who are watching what is happening in the natural world and in their neighborhood and doing something about it. Linda Russo is a poet, scholar, essay writer, willing co creator, collaborator, and student of ecospheric care through the lens of ecofeminism or geopoetics or inspired by indigenous practices of interspecies kinship. Her works explore relationality with a more than human world alongside the complexities presented by fragmentation of land and human attention to place. Their most recent book, The Verdant, was awarded the Halcyon Award for Poetry from Middle Creek Publishing. She teaches at Washington State University and enjoys engaging with students and community through eco arts on the Palouse. Linda, welcome.
Well, thank you, Paul.
It's a delight to connect with you in this way.
Yes, absolutely. I appreciate it. Thank you so much
I
for that
appreciate
intro.
I appreciate it as well. Your clear articulation of what you're about. You're not a native of Pullman, but you've taught there for many years. When you first moved to the Palouse, what were your immediate impressions?
Well, I drove down from Spokane, flew into Spokane, which, has a lot of trees and mountains, and then you move into the Palouse landscape, which is, I can only describe as alien. A little alienating because it didn't have a lot of the features. It didn't have a lot of the geographical features or natural, the environments that I was used to growing up in the Northeast. Um, but I have, in my background here, I have a creek. And what I discovered as a way to make this place home was I had to do two things. I had to do what people did here, which was garden. That I, I joined the community garden and spent a lot of time getting to know what grows here. But the community garden runs along the Palouse River, so I was also mm, encouraged to explore the river habitat and the creek habitat, and much of that is in my book, Meaning to Go to the Origin in Some Way, in my book of about 10 years ago. So the Palouse, I think we have a sense of what the Palouse is from all of the iconic photographs and of the rolling wheat fields. But for me, it was important to discover, those, I call them the wild edge spaces. Like, where is the biodiversity? Where are all the beings? Where are the multiple meanings in this landscape? Where can I connect to, more ancient meanings in this landscape was really important to me when you're coming into a landscape. For people who don't know, the Palouse is a large industrial agricultural area, growing mainly wheat and garbanzo beans and lentils. So you can imagine just the fields and, I don't know, millions of acres of croplands. So a kind of, monocrop feeling. And I was very uncomfortable for me. Um, yeah, so that's what I did. That's how I made it home.
It's uncomfortable because it's not natural.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's harnessed. It's a mind landscape, really. Yeah, so there's whatever we might think of as those more wild spaces or more natural spaces they're rare. They're hard to come by. They are valued and preserved by lots of organizations in the area that I have worked with. So it's a, I guess, an awareness here, but you wouldn't really know it necessarily looking from the outside in.
Unpack that phrase, wild edge places
Well,
or
where
spaces you use. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. I mean, where in this industrial farmed landscape can you find those niche communities that are biodiverse, that are harvesting or supporting, nourishing other, myriad life forms. Where can other beings exist in their relations in this place, which are, their ancient relations in this place, the trees, the plants, and the animals that evolved to live here. So they're definitely edge spaces because they're pushed to the edge of the landscape, whether it's because of the farming or the way the patterns of settlement, right? I mean, this is not unusual when you think about suburban America. What gets how the landscape just continually gets kind of eaten into, and whatever is still wild in a sense, gets pushed to the edge. So that's why I call them the wild edge landscapes. They're at the wild edge spaces. They're spaces where one can go and kind of, for me, have the thought, feel a kind of freeness, in my mind, so that I'm not also, harnessed in within the ethos of the industrial landscape, the monocrop, the singular objective, the anthropocentrism of those objectives.
It's fascinating because here I am in Seattle and, just tons and tons and tons and tons of concrete and asphalt and our own edge spaces, our own little creek right here that I find some solace at. And you think comparing to Pullman, this is away from population centers, away from that, and yet it's the same dynamic that organic, wild nature is pushed into these cracks. And I never really thought about it that way until you pointed it out.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, there's, it's the country, so to speak, but it's also not. It's also, like I said, a farmed, a mined space as well.
Yeah.
That makes sense. The infrastructures that we create, they come in different forms, and I think part of being in this place is recognizing like what those infrastructures are. We might not have the concrete, but we have other forms of I guess, what we lay over the land in order to enable a certain kind of production. So I think it's interesting, to compare the concrete to the monocrop, and each of those is, enabling a certain kind of interaction, a certain kind of exchange. And so I want in my own work to focus on those overlooked exchanges, um, you know, to bring back wild minds, so to speak, to quote Gary Snyder. Yeah, and you need to, go to those. You need to go to those spaces wherever they are, where you live. Like you don't have to go to the mountains. I think William Cronin talks about in the trouble with wilderness is the thought that wilderness is something you need to go far away. You need to travel to get to, and um, it's not though, really. You can nourish and nurture these spaces in your own, where you are as a kind of, you know, in your bioregion or in the place where you live.
Yeah. Wilderness could be something as simple as a madrone tree down the block. Yeah.
Mhm.
Tell us how this came to be, the verdant. I sometimes don't know how to, don't know which way. Sometimes when I'm picking it up and reading it again, it's like, wait, you got to,
Yeah.
it's, uh,
Indeed. It's a book that won't sit still while you're reading it. How did it come to be? I mean, it came to be in the spring of 2017. I was engaged in a kind of a mutual collaboration with a friend where we were both sort of struggling with our new kind of political reality, and at the end of a difficult semester. And so it started in the spring, and literally that spring, and literally, I mean, the long poem in the book says it's from the um, flower to the strawberry moon. So it was initially written between that one lunar cycle. And for me, it was a way of grounding, reconnecting. I wrote it outside. I mean, I wrote it in my backyard, but, reconnecting, grounding, just kind of feeling like, healing after a lot of, that political upheaval of the election cycle and the new, kind of new reality we were facing. And then it took 8 years actually after that in the remaking of the book, the really sitting with what is it this book wants to invite in. So I was at over that month, I was tracking the lunar cycle, but I was also reading works that helped me think about time. I wanted to think about like a deeper sense of time, especially as, how do I recover in a sense from the academic temporalities, the temporality of the semester, which is so intense and so tiring. So I wanted to reach for, I wanted to be living or being in a different sense of time. So that's what motivated the book. And I mean, I was also motivated by my kind of studies as I guess an amateur naturalist of to I had already been studying, the plants and animals of this place as a part of my making a home here is like, well, who else lives here and how do they make a home here? So I expanded that awareness by consulting a field guide to the Pacific Northwest. And that helped me come up with a larger list of animals, some I haven't, personally encountered, many I have that I thought, well, they're in this space in the inland northwestern US, as it's now called. And so let me bring them into the space of the book. And so the species were a kind of later layering. And then as I went through, and it was a journal originally, as I said, just a month's journal. But then as I went through and um, I guess I wanted to I mean, I had a sense that it was a book, and I tend to write book length works. And I also tend to do this thing where the book length work is in three pieces and three parts. So I was trying to resist that. However, I failed because this is still a book in three parts. Um, the major three parts. I mean, okay, well, it was a book in two parts with the invocation and then the shorter House of the Animal Entrances, which is what the book was originally called, because I really wanted to create a space that it was a habitable space, but it invited in, right? It invited other beings to come in. And so it's still kind of a book in three parts. But yeah, so I just went back into the journals and I just kept working with the materials. And then as I was working with it, I decided there were not only the invocation to the myriad species that occur on each page of the book, but there was another voice that I wanted to include that ends up on the right-hand margin. And for me, that was a voice of like an elder voice. The verdant is this figure of emergence, this young figure. I am the verdant, but I'm going to be an elder soon. And so this book was sort of holding, I guess, both of those senses of, who I am and where I am. So that's how the page became like a multivocal space because of that. So,
Fantastic. We'll get an example of that in a moment. There's one other question is, you open the book and you start reading it, the quotes, they're quotes from Lorene Niedecker and Joanne Kiger. And I'd love for you to tell us um, what exactly those writers and their work and their lives have meant for your own work and life.
um, well, that's really a beautiful question, and thank you for that. I just, um, just immense gratitude to them for the kind of the lives they lived and the truths that they held true to were so important to me. I mean, they're both poets of place and who pay deep attention to the places where they chose to live their lives. Joanne Kiger in Bolinas, California, and Lori Niedecker in Black Hawk Island in Wisconsin. Um, and I think that their poems do a similar kind of work of assembling. We often uh, talk about Niederker as like a second, late generation modernist, objectivist kind of like. So there is that objectivist lens to her work, but there's also a lot of um, the personal, and there's a lot of care of place, and that I guess for both of them, that deep, well, for Niederker I think especially that deep inquiry. I mean, Joanne Kiger does her inquiries into place too, but her work, for me, is really more about the she always said, get out of your head and shed these illusions. You started talking about this illusion of humanist delusion, right? Or human centric delusion. And she was always about get out of your head, don't take yourself too seriously, live in the place where you live with this mindful intention and care. And I have not been to Black Hawk Island yet. I need to spend time in where Niederker lived, to more fully understand her work. But I have spent a lot of time in Bolinas, and I've spent a lot of time, talking to Joanne and interviewing her, and being a guest in her space, in her house, and really, really seeing, like, valuing that her poems and the porousness of thought in her poems. And I mean, her poems admit, I mean, they're daily, they're journal poems. They admit what comes in, and they make a very graceful and sometimes, sharply critical, sometimes self-mockery, a lot of love of friends and joy, a lot of irony, but the poem becomes a space to admit what is the daily, like what's of import in the daily, both in her life, but also in the, bioregion, and the lives that her way of making a home in a place also supports, right? The land that she lived on, and and the gardens she grew, and the animals that passed through. And she was, for me, the first, in my awareness, of the first person I ever heard the word bioregional poet appended to. And I didn't know what a bioregional poet was. I didn't know what a bioregion was. And this is when I was a graduate student, in the poetics program. And I had an interest in Kiger. Partly, it was largely formal, and it was largely because she was in Olson, the lineage of Charles Olson, which was a huge emphasis, at the poetics program in Buffalo, where Olson and Creeley both taught. I was a student of Creeley's there. And so looking for a female figure out of that generation was important to me. And her sense of form, that that came down to her through, I guess, through projective verse, through Charles Olson, through the page as a space, through the breath line. I really loved the grace of her poems on the page. I just loved the sense, the organicism of the line. And I guess certainly that's something that's carried through, in my own work, is the page. I don't think you see Niederker as much, because Niederker wrote in, these little stanzas, but she did write long poems. Both of them, have this sort of extended inquiry through the poem that is, I think, is a really beautiful, valuable thing. And a space I wanted to have that space in my own writing, both conceptually and materially. So that's my story through Niederker and Kiger. Part of it, probably. There's probably more.
That is so fantastic. The Cedar Saigo compilation here, and I was going through this, and there's this interview that she gave to, what I will find this, to John Thorpe of Convivio, and she's talking about several things. She's talking about how, well, is it in that part? It's hard to remember just exactly what part is what. She talks about this notion of singing bullets connecting in the ear, which I think is just a fantastic concept. And I was reminded of that just recently as I was writing a day song. And then the other thing is about lineation and how it should be scored on the page for how it could be read. And she says in one of those interviews in that book, I'm surprised this isn't taught more,
Mm,
which is so it's just so spot on, and how somehow that escaped the majority of poets writing in North America right now. It's kind of it seems kind of surprising to me, but then again, we come from similar schools of Olson Pound and Duncan Levertov and all these organic folks. Then the other thing about Niederker I wanted to say, I don't want to add to anything that you said because it was so eloquent and so heartfelt. It just was really beautiful. But when you do go to Black Hawk Island, how tiny that little cabin is, it's just insane. And the stories of her living there without a coat, without heat. I mean, all these things that these two ladies have went through, especially at the time in which they lived, and the cultural misogyny that was in many ways. Well, is it more intense than now? I don't know. We could get into that argument, but that's for another day. Before the interview, we talked about.
It also wasn't always very ladylike because of the labor. I mean, we don't think of ladies necessarily as laboring, but there was a lot of work that went into keeping those spaces. Or Niedeker coming out of a working class background, and there were no. I guess ladies was just a little bit of pretension there that I don't really see in their work or lives.
Yeah,
Although
these women. Yeah, absolutely. No, these women who I respect tremendously. What they had to go through to do what they did is when you learn a little bit about their lives, when you watch the movie about Lorene Niedeker, and of course I visited that place just through the hedge there in Bolinas, and it's something to see and to witness. And I'd love for it to be preserved for other people who appreciated Joanne's work, but who knows what's going to happen with the tech bros finding Bolinas. Um, Before the interview, we talked about different poems I might ask you to read, and I skipped over one on page 20, and I'd love it if you could read that poem, page 20.
page 20. Okay. I'm going to share my screen so anyone watching can see the poem on the page. Maybe I'll just do it for this one poem, Paul, and not for all of them, but um, just so I'm not constantly maneuvering with I want to make sure I'm on that's page 19, 20. Okay, here we go. So page 20. So it says sockeye, dandelion, and sagebrush at the top.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to share my screen. So in reading this poem, I mean, in reading from the verse, I've encountered some, challenges because well, there's a novel pronoun for one, which has been an interesting facet of this text for me to encounter as I continue reading it. It came out on Equinox in 2024. So I feel like I was still launching the book for the whole year and figuring out how to read it. And even I just gave a reading, and I was in Galway, Ireland at a conference with Jonathan Skinner, Harriet Tarlow, and Camilla Nelson were on the panel with me, and we were talking about our own work. So we did a multivocal reading of this work, which was the first time I'd actually gotten to have several voices in the text. So if I were to do a univocal or vocal reading, this is what it would look like. Sockeye, dandelion, sagebrush come in. Grasses pushed back, took the newest path, a slow beetle on a pine needle. The final clock sounds, grasses and flowers, shrubs and sticks. Let them take you. Opened this cover, found this text, reading forward, reading back, ant and magpie, cigarette butts and plastic ribs. To climb yet further, made this ladder of sticks, watched cotton tree fur wafting and caught, shifting, revealing a new rhythm in its wrong.
The open parenthesis takes the place of the I. How would you articulate that?
Um, it's a new I. I guess it's a new sense of um, I like Joanna Macy's concept of an ecological self as a way of to think of the I. I mean, as a poet in a lyrical or even post-lyrical tradition, you are faced with the concept of, the I of the poem. And many poems revolve around the thoughts, feelings, and experiences of an I. And I this um, I wanted an immersive and dissipative I. I wanted I mean the whole poem, because the verdant is an emergent being. There's a kind of humility of the learning process of like how to be human in a sense in this work. And the I that typographic mark that I finally settled on for the work suggested to me a sense of humility, even a sense of the pilgrim. Um, but I also really wanted it to be, there's an uncertainty there for even for me as I read it, like how do I sound this I mean, I get the journey of the I, and I know what the book is trying to do in terms of the immersive I, the interspecies I, interspecies community, kind of making a new path forward. Um, and but I like the humming and singing. I mean, I've tried many different ways in my readings over the year of vocalizing the I. And that's why I want to show the page to readers, because it's a navigation. Like reading is always navigating, but many poems give us you know totally transparent signposts about how to navigate the text from left to right and top to bottom. But I feel like we are in this time of like, we need new stories, we need new we're navigating a different terrain, and that's constantly shifting under our feet. And so how do we maybe represent how, I mean, for me, like this poem feels, I mean, it feels contemporary to me in that way. It feels like it's, both trying to reach back to some ancient wisdom, but also trying to just be the person I'm trying to be in this place at this time.
How did you decide to call in the species, and what intention is there for that act?
Um, the intention for me was ceremonial, um, to kind of create a space for the poem to take place in. And so, the first poem in the book, called Invocation, House of the Animal Species, is um, just that invocation, that list of inviting all these different animals in. And I'm not sure, to be honest, I'm not sure I decided. I don't know. I don't remember a point at which I made the decision of like, there has to be animals in this poem, or there has to be other species in this poem. I think it just more came organically, as it were, out of the kind of situation I was, you know, in, as living in the place I live in, trying to live in it as a inhabitory person, so to speak. Um, and yeah, so the animals, they were always coming in. We just happened to enter into the story in a place and somehow turned it around so that the animals now have to be invited in for them to exist in the consciousness. I mean, part of it was let me build the consciousness of the story of the verdant. And I had to do that. I found I had to do that transparent sort of like invocation and reminder that like no, we live in spaces that are multi-species spaces. For me, that's really apparent. Outside my window, my study. I mean, I've seen, turkeys, fox, deer kind of just walk by on this. I live in the city of Pullman. I live on one of the hills, but it just happens to be still sort of lots of trees and animals like to pass through. Um, but I know that I wanted to also build that world for the poem to live in, so that it would make sense uh, in the book for a reader.
Fantastic. Talk to us about those phrases in your bio: ecospheric care, ecofeminism, geopoetics. How do you define those terms, and um, how do they manifest as lenses for you in your work?
Oh my, okay. That's a three-part question, kind of.
I guess
Um,
it is. And, if you answered one or two and skipped one, that'd be okay. But, those are very particular phrases.
yeah,
And I'd love to hear your take on them.
yeah. So, geopoetics, I mean, I've always felt myself to be a poet of geographic space. I'm interested in the spaces we live in. I'm interested in how we modify them. I'm interested in the history of those spaces. I'm interested too in the layer of what's called social geography and how we layer upon spaces, our relationships to I mean all that flows through the spaces we build and the wild spaces that we don't build our relationship to that. And so geopoetics for me initially comes right down from Olson and the Maximus poems, which is, you know, pretty much a geopoesis in that work, and Niederker too, in Lake Superior. I think that's a geopoetic work. I think Joanne Kiger was doing geopoetic work too, in Bolinas. And so and then I was kind of invited into that, as it was an emergent field in geography. Eric McGrain was a figure who was a kind of merging poetry and geography amongst many others, but he did invite me in to co-edit the work Geopoetics in Practice. So that was an opportunity to really broaden the sense of what geopoetics might mean. So I invite people to take a look at that work if they're interested in geopoetics. I found that it was a way to bring a level of complexity to talking about ecopoetics. I feel that ecopoetics had kind of gotten to this place where the definition was starting to feel stuck, and it was I think it was harder to see more some of the complexity that even, let's say, motivated the emergence of ecopoetics through the thinking of Jonathan Skinner and the journal Ecopoetics, which was very much more about, kind of creating new ways in poetry of like seeing and expressing and exploring, um, and to um, make a distinction, between the romantic lineage of nature poetry and a more contemporary lineage of eco poetry. Um, as Juliana Spar like famously said, what is it, 20, 30 years ago now? I don't know, but a nature poem is the poem about the bird in the tree, and the eco poem is the poem that also has the bulldozer that's about to, you know, destroy the habitat. So yeah, so
Brenda Hillman calls it worried nature poetry.
oh yes. And yeah, well, biopoesis. I love Brenda's term of biopoesis to add to this, right? The poetics of the of the biome. So that's geopoetics. I mean, ecofeminism is simply a way of recentering the discourse around um, female, feminine, um, I guess, values and cares. And I don't want to be exclusive in that rhetoric either. I mean, I'm not saying you have to be a woman to have an eco-feminist poetics, either. but just that it's a way of um, saying that there are traditionally um, traditions of care of the more than human world that do center on women as figures. So let's not forget that. Let's not forget that somewhere in our lineage, we have a great grandmother who was probably a witch, probably an herbalist. I mean, a witch in the sense that she was an herbalist and she was working with both the medicinal and spiritual powers of the natural world. I think it's important to know that where we are now is a temporary construction of how things are, and it's very androcentric. So to say, to say ecofeminism is simply to remind us that ecology, of that tradition, that we're at a moment in time, but we can work with and look at things differently as our continual I guess our as our narrative continues to unfold. So that's why feminism is important to me, and that connects with ecospheric care, the feminist notion of care work, of acknowledging the labor of especially marginalized people or women of color. The feminist notion of care work is meant to make visible the labor of figures who are made invisible, um, and especially people in Black or brown bodies. And so to think about, there's a lot of that invisible, care that either um, is committed to the natural world or the more than human world. Um, so ecospheric care, when I took up this idea, I mean, I used to say I was a teacher of ecospheric care because that was what I wanted. That was a concept I wanted to bring into my teaching through the Eco Arts on the Palouse project. And I wanted to think, it reunites body and mind, thinking of practices of care, like in ways that literary texts don't always let us into. Is that like, no, there's a really embodied work in care and in, I don't know, being kind of an immersive person, someone who feels that they're still a part of the more than human world. So then I thought, well, no, I'm not really a teacher of ecospheric care because I'm still new. I'm new at this. There are lineages of care that I'm just learning myself about and teaching myself about. And so that's why I call myself a student of ecospheric care. I want to keep trying and learning methods of care that practices of care, and how do I do that as a literary person? How do I do that as a poet? Um, so that's why, I guess that's why ecospheric care is an important term to me. Yeah,
Fantastic. Could you read the poem on page 26?
sure. I'm going to read from my book now.
Cottontail rabbit, garter snake, nine leaf. What is it? It's kind of a grayed out text, so my old eyes.
It's Lomatium.
Lomatium. Yeah, come in.
Thank you so much. I do. I don't want to break the spell of the poem because you just started it, but I
Sorry
really
about
appreciate that.
sorry about that.
No, no, you started the spell of the poem. So that was a surprise. That surprised me. How did they expect to live when they measured out hours like doses? Can they remember why data held strong? Remember how and when they counted coins and cells, imprisoned others to count them? Remember why they spliced genes? You are not wholly dead if you remember. Why they grew very few crops, modified seeds, trucked bees, reshaped trees to abolish harvesting by hand. When in the space left, unfamiliar weather arrives, will it matter?
There's a whole different context when I read that poem after the chat we've had up until this point. It's very potent. And the question that I had written down was, you are not wholly dead if you remember. And so the question that I thought of when I was preparing for this interview yesterday was, do you think that our industry generated culture and disconnection from nature leads to a sort of walking deadness?
Um, well, the emergence of the zombie movie as a genre in the post-war, post-World War II uh, era. Um, I don't know that, I'm not a historian, so I don't know that um I don't know that I can speak to the kind of, I guess, intention of a kind of, I mean, certainly, it's certainly the capitalist system has its own intensities and necessities that it tries to very baldly train us, right? As consumers. And I think you could read zombie movies in that sense, especially when in the 80s when they take place in the mall, right? Um, but I just know so yes, I mean I think I could discourse about that perhaps a little more intelligently in writing.
Well, you did it very well in the poem. I mean,
Oh, thank you.
that's exactly what I got. And not only as something getting that across, but also this tremendous sense of loss, this tremendous grief, which I just, as you read it, I tuned into that and I'm like,
Um,
holy shit. How does a writer maintain that objectivity of these horrific kinds of things, which you mention, which you write? And at first glance, you might just see it as a lyric poem and say, yeah, that's a shame. And when you hear it in the context of how we did it, it's like a gut punch. Wow.
well,
Thank you
I
for,
want to no, thank you. I mean, I'm really touched by how, you're bringing your full self into the hearing and reading of the poem, and I really appreciate that. I mean, objectivity, I guess it's because it took me 8 years to write the book. And this was after a period. I mean, there were times when I felt so spiritually like dead, really. I mean, I know there are real deaths, encumbered by the dominant system that we live in, and not to overlook the significance of those deaths of people, species, communities, values, but just to say the kind of personal feeling of deadness that I went through, um, and sort of this, and then how do you heal yourself? How do you bring yourself back to life? Um, I think only then can you look back on it and be and have the lines of the poem kind of line up and speak a kind of truth that is um in its truth is devastating. Um, but they're also the facts of the world that we live in. So to some people they are just really just the facts of the world we live in, and not um the resonance, or the spiritual or emotional resonance of that world.
very interesting. The next question that I had written after that was, do you have any totem animals or plants with which you resonate deeply?
Hmm. um well, yes, I don't think of them as totem, because they're still other living beings, and you know mm, I don't totemize them, I guess, but and I'm more and more I'm a plant person more than I mean, animal person, but I'd say, snails, earthworms, and rabbits, I feel a lot of sympathy with, uh, closeness to. I think I mean, in their incredible vulnerability, but also I mean, rabbits especially, I mean, incredibly vulnerable, but also, smart and quick and prolific is part of their survival strategy. And I think earthworms are just simply incredible. Like we couldn't do a lot of what we do without them constantly manufacturing the soil for us and breaking things down and leading these deep secret lives. I'm a Cancer, so I've got my public and my very private like guarded self. So I don't know if the earthworm reflects my Cancer nature, but and the snail, of course, is with the shell, the protective shell. But the snail with the slowness with which one can proceed very successfully in life has become like more and more important to me. When I talked about like the verdant being a time of writing the verdant being a time of recalibrating temporality, thinking of the slowness and how slow can one possibly go and still, I guess, I mean, for me anyway, just still, you know, be a productive person in the position I'm in my job and in my community. I mean, there was a slow growth. I'm sure you've heard of it, or the degrowth movement, but this idea of like, we don't need to keep growing, expanding, and getting quicker and faster and better, or quicker and faster isn't always better. Um, and plants, I am working on a plant ally project. I'm not really ready to share it in this public forum right now, but I'm a self-taught herbalist, and so I learning skills to interact with plants in different ways on different levels, and um, so there will be more to come on that front in terms of which plant I'm really allying myself with and why. I hope there's a book or more poems at least that I can actually read and share at some point that come out of that.
Fantastic. I look forward to that. We have a house rabbit, and my wife subscribes to the House Rabbit Journal. And when I take my walks, I try to remember scissors or clippers to get chicory or blackberry leaves or little hawthornberry branches or clover or all kinds of things that the rabbit loves to eat. So when I come out from a walk, he's like, "Okay, what did you bring me? What did you bring me?" So it's I've discovered a real rabbit love over the last 10, 11 years.
Well, the hawthorn is the medicine of the heart.
Yeah, my dad was on hawthornberry extract near the end because I had a naturopathic doctor, and
Mm,
the Bastyr Clinic carries hawthornberry extract as well as licorice root extract.
mm.
It's also very, very potent. I remember giving that to McClure, licorice root extract, and you're supposed to spoon a little bit in hot water to make tea. And he said, Jim Morrison would have loved this because it's intense, is what he said. um, there, there's a poem on page 46
All right.
that we talked about reading, and then I'll control myself from reading the gray area. But I only read that because I wanted to make sure we were on the same page.
46. Okay. Will you open the poem again?
Black-chinned hummingbird, prairie June grass, steelhead, come in.
Under a sliver of moon, is there still a you to listen, a you to speak, a you to become lively with words in another language? I feel this worldliness giving back in ways I cannot explain. There is no you to explain it. In sweet lilac air, barefoot among rampant trees, cures felt, temporality renewed reciprocally.
Yeah. That poem and a line from the one on page 40, which goes, wanting to reshape this thought to release, wanting, have strong Zen echoes for me. And this is something that we touched on earlier, this sense of self. Is it Zen or is it some other tradition where the self is it? I mean, in Zen, it's understood as an illusion.
Mm. I'm not a close student of Zen, but I could definitely see the affinities there. Um, I mean, I have in the past, practiced Zazen and had a sense of like what it is to sit in that space. Um, and that mindful or mind empty. So yeah, that's probably coming through in my sense. Um, I think in the healing journey of this book, to feel that there isn't a you at a particular point is also part of that healing of what the system took away, right? What we're constantly being asked to give parts of ourselves, and um, again, as an end of semester kind of recovery work, like what of me was left, um, and not really having time to maintain as much as I'd like my creative practice or my allegiances to poetry or to exploring my plants. It's just a fact of that, that temporality. So I feel this worldliness giving back in ways I cannot explain. Yeah, becoming attuned to that was part of what was important in bringing me back to being able to even conceive of like writing a poem. Like at times I think I even forget like what is a poem? Why do poems exist? And then I sit down and I said, okay, let me just open this space and write something. And then I'm instantly taken up like, oh yes, this is what a poem is. It's not a poem unless it's being written. Like it is the writing of the poem that is also the poem. And so um I don't know if there's any Zen in that. Um,
Yeah,
but
and there's some Whitehead in that too, occasions of experience. I mean, I think those I take them as synonymous, but I'm sure there's a lot of people who wouldn't.
mm,
Yeah. It's one thing to be connected to nature, but it's quite another to think one cannot be at peace as an individual,
mm,
which is a line from the poem on page 55. I'd love
mhm.
it if you could read that one.
Sure.
Scarlet paintbrush, yellow paintbrush, raccoon, come in.
In community and breath, in nutrient dark, I cannot be at peace as an individual. Humans may again become creatures of community. With book of earth underfoot, lay this cheek on the prone face of grasses to await the ceremony of healing stories, nutriment evolving. Why tell other stories?
Yeah, those are the two lines I highlighted in that poem.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe the last one first, why tell other stories? This so resonates so deeply with me when you're talking about the zombie movie. I didn't know that it happened in a mall because there's no way I'm going to see a son. I wouldn't want to tell that story. I don't want to hear that story. And I can understand that people want to go see that, but not my thing. And I remember the context. And that you brought that up in response to that question was just so perfect. And I got it immediately without having to have gone through the movies. So why tell other stories resonates really deeply with me, but
Mm.
you cannot be at peace as an individual. I wouldn't want you to explain that, but I'd like to know some of the subtext of how you came to write that.
Well, I'd have to dig back into the original journal and see what that looked like and what it was doing on the page at the time, or how it even came into the poem. Um, but I would say that it's a political awareness that I mean it's an ecological awareness too, that we're not individuals, we're not solid, we're not independent of, the natural world or Earth's living systems. We're not individuals biologically. We're biomes. We're less human than we are other kinds of organisms. Um, and but for me, politically, in terms of community, it's like, how do you um, I mean, I'm sorry, in terms of politics, the community is so important. Political change doesn't happen by virtue or force of individuals. Hopefully this is a lesson that will bear out over the next few years, but that communities, being creatures of community, uh, is kind of our saving grace, holding each other, holding space for each other, making, caring for each other. So I think that again, like being at a particular juncture in my life and kind of feeling the blunt force of a kind of individualistic thinking, especially where resources are concerned, competition, right, for resources in I mean in academia or anywhere really, like that doesn't make me feel good. Like being a part of that system doesn't, make me feel good. I prefer a system that encouraged mutual flourishing, an organization that encouraged mutual flourishing. And of course, there are ways that people, even though, people do nurture that and make that happen. I'm just speaking to my personal experience at the end of a particularly difficult, period, where I felt depleted of resources. Yeah.
Mutual flourishing
Mm.
come in.
Yeah.
Really have the intention to call it in and to live one's life like that. There are several more questions I have, but we've been at it for an hour, and it's been my experience that if you get a good hour from someone, then you've had a real gift. I might be able to send you the extra questions, and should you care to answer them or provide something for that, totally your choice. That'd be interesting to see. But there was a question that came up in the course of doing this interview that I hadn't really planned out in advance. And I think it was in response to your question about Lorene Niedecker and Joanne Kiger, two poets who I also um, derive ongoing inspiration from. When I see some art that I don't really care for, I'll tell Bhakti I didn't find it generative. And I find Niedecker and Kiger endlessly generative. And they both lived in their places. They were committed to their places. Black Hawk Island near Fort Atkinson, Wisconsin, about 100 miles from where I grew up, by the way,
Mm.
and Bolinas, California. Do you see yourself living in Pullman? Are you that connected that you couldn't see yourself living anywhere else, or how does that look for you?
Well, I'm not from here. Um, and so I I wouldn't, yeah, I wouldn't say this is the end of my journey in terms of where I get to um explore and live and connect, and but also I think of the broader Northwest too as part of my home, but of course the Cascade Mountains and the Great Rivers and the I think I affiliate and the coast. I'm not that far from the coast. Like I said, I am a Cancer. I'm a crab. I'm a water person. I have a water nature, which is why I go to the creeks, but this is not this place is very dry. It's not for it's not for water people. Yeah, so uh yeah, I hope that wherever I live, I continue to make the poem of the place or make the life in that place with the poems. But It's been a lot of work. I mean, I've been here over 15 years. And it took me 8 years or 16. It took me 8 years to write my first book of this place, which is meaning to go to the origins in some way, and now 8 years to write the verdant. So there's a significant, investment of time and knowledge in this place. So, who knows? Story's not over yet.
Fantastic. Would you care to end with a poem? Maybe that poem on page 68?
Yes, I'd love to end with a poem. 68. All right, we're there.
Horsehair lichen, service berry, lemon balm, come in.
Mm. I too arrive, prairie suffused with vibrant histories, happinesses, a rare catchfly through filtered light. Even when few remain, their stories travel on wind, take root, step in. New species of language bear new meanings, and not knowing what to love first or best, I learned partnering, making a space beyond human reason, open by blossom and furrowing.
What a depth of consciousness. What an open interview this has been. Really, really beautiful. I was unprepared for how beautiful this experience was going to be, and I'm really grateful for it. I wish you continued success. I thank you for your time, and I hope that our paths cross again soon.
Thank you so much, Paul. I appreciate you, and I too hope to cross paths with you again. Thank you so much.
The book is The Verdant. The author is Linda Russo. She's been our guest today.